The group text came through at 9:47 p.m. Family dinner tomorrow, just the core group. You understand. I stared at those 3 words. You understand. Like I'd signed up for this. Like being left out was my specialty, my contribution to family harmony. The replies came fast. Thumbs up from Dad. Heart emoji from Mom. My brother wrote perfect, with an exclamation point. They were validating it. Right there. In real time. Endorsing my erasure like it was a dinner reservation, not a deliberate cut. I typed back 1 word. Sure. Then I turned off my phone and sat in the dark of my apartment, feeling that familiar ache. The one that lives in your chest when you realize you're not even worth the confrontation. But the next morning, I walked into a building they didn't know I had keys to. And everything they thought they understood about me shattered in one silent moment. If you've ever been dismissed like this, stay. You'll want the ending. It was supposed to be a celebration. My parents' backyard, string lights tangled between the trees, the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid hanging in the air. Cousins I hadn't seen in months, aunts asking the same questions they always asked, uncles standing near the grill like they were guarding something sacred. Everyone was there. Everyone who mattered, anyway. That's what my brother said when he arrived, slapping Dad on the back, his voice loud enough for the whole yard to hear. Everyone who matters. And I was standing right there, 10 feet away, holding a bowl of potato salad I'd made from scratch because someone had to, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be him. My mother laughed. Not a full laugh, just that little exhale through her nose that means agreement without words. My father nodded, sipping his beer, his eyes crinkling in that way they do when he's proud. Proud of my brother. Always proud of my brother. And I just stood there feeling the heat rise in my face, feeling that familiar tightness in my throat, the one that says don't speak, don't make this worse, don't be difficult. So I didn't. I set the bowl down on the table next to the ribs and the corn and the store-bought coleslaw no one would eat. And I smiled. I smiled because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. She's so easy, my aunt said later, patting my arm like I was a dog who'd learned to sit quietly. Never any drama with this one. And the table agreed. Murmurs of approval. Nods. My brother grinned at me from across the deck, that smug little grin that said we both know your place here. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to ask them when exactly I'd agreed to be the family's emotional furniture, present, functional, but never the focal point. Instead, I excused myself to get more ice. I stood in my parents' kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, my hands gripping the edge of the sink, and I made a decision. Not to argue. Not to defend myself. Not to explain what they should already know. I decided to leave. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just to go. To stop participating in my own diminishment. When I came back outside, no one had noticed I'd been gone. My brother was telling a story about a business deal, gesturing wildly, everyone leaning in like he was revealing state secrets. I set the ice bucket down. I picked up my purse. I walked to my car. My mother called after me. Leaving already? Not concerned. Just surprised. Like I'd broken a rule I didn't know existed. The rule that said I stay until dismissed, until my absence is convenient, until I've served my purpose. I waved. I got in my car. I drove away. And in the rearview mirror, I saw them all go back to the story, back to the laughter, back to the world where I was easy and uncomplicated and never worth the trouble of understanding. You'll understand why I didn't argue in a moment. I learned early that asking for attention was a sin in my family. Not the kind they'd admit to. Not the kind they'd preach about at church or write in a parenting book. But the kind that lived in glances and sighs and the way conversations shifted when I walked into a room. I was 7 when my brother was born, and from that moment, I became the reliable one. The easy one. The one who didn't need things. My mother used to say it like it was a compliment. You're so independent. You never ask for help. And I'd glow under those words, thinking I'd won something, thinking I'd cracked the code of love. But what I'd really done was train them to expect my silence. My brother cried and they ran. I cried and they told me to toughen up. My brother failed a test and they hired a tutor. I failed a test once in 10th grade chemistry, and my father said, "Well, you'll figure it out. You always do." And I did. I figured it out. I figured out everything. I figured out how to cook dinner when Mom was too tired. I figured out how to pay for my own college applications when they'd already spent the money on my brother's basketball camp. I figured out how to smile through Christmas mornings where his gifts towered over mine, where the phrase, "You're practical, you don't need much," was supposed to feel like wisdom instead of neglect. The worst part wasn't the disparity. It was the praise. They praised me for not needing, for not asking, for being low maintenance. And every time they said it, I felt the box close a little tighter around me. I tried once, to tell my mother I was struggling. I was 19, home from my first semester of college, drowning in work-study shifts and classes I was barely passing because I couldn't afford the textbooks. I said, "I don't know if I can keep this up." And she looked at me with something close to disappointment and said, "You've always been so strong. Don't lose that now." So I didn't. I kept it up. I kept everything up. And I stopped speaking. My brother, meanwhile, learned that speaking was power. He learned that confidence was currency, even when it wasn't backed by competence. He learned that being loud meant being heard, and being heard meant being valued. He failed upward his entire life. Failed classes, failed jobs, failed relationships, and every time, someone caught him. My parents caught him. His friends caught him. Strangers caught him because he had that thing, that effortless charm that made people want to help. I didn't have that. Or maybe I did once before I learned that asking for help was the same as admitting weakness, and weakness was the fastest way to disappear. By the time I was 25, I'd stopped telling my family anything real. I told them I was fine. I told them work was good. I told them I was happy. And they believed me because it was easier than asking follow-up questions. They believed me because I'd given them permission to not care, and they'd taken it eagerly, gratefully, like I'd done them a favor. My brother, though, he told them everything. Every minor inconvenience was a crisis. Every setback was a tragedy. And they listened. They dropped everything to listen. I used to resent him for that. I used to think he was selfish, manipulative, weak. But he wasn't. He was just operating in a system that rewarded noise. And I was the one who'd volunteered for silence. Have you ever been praised in a way that boxed you in? The thing about building a life quietly is that no one notices until it's too late. I didn't announce when I got promoted. I didn't post on social media when I bought my first property. I didn't send a family email when I was asked to lead a major project at work. The kind of project that comes with corner offices and six-figure decisions and your name on the door. I just did it. I signed the paperwork, I moved into the new office, I started making calls that shifted budgets and timelines and people's entire careers. And at Sunday dinners, when my mother asked how work was, I said, "Good. Busy." And she said, "That's nice, honey," and turned to my brother to ask about his latest idea. His latest idea was always the same. Big plans. Vague execution. He'd gotten into commercial real estate, or at least that's what he told people. He had one deal under his belt, a small office lease he'd brokered for a friend's startup, and he talked about it like he'd built the Empire State Building with his bare hands. My father ate it up. "That's my boy," he'd say, clinking his beer against my brother's. Making moves. And I'd sit there, cutting my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, wondering what it would take for them to ask me a single substantive question. Just one. But they never did. Because I'd trained them not to. My brother started talking about a big opportunity. He dropped it casually at first, the way people do when they want you to ask but won't admit it. "Got something in the works," he'd say, smirking into his drink. "Could change everything." And my parents would lean in, eyes bright, hungry for his success in a way they'd never been hungry for mine. "Tell us," my mother would say, practically vibrating with anticipation. And he'd wave her off, playing coy, playing powerful. "Soon," he'd say. "Soon." I knew he was full of shit. Or at least, I knew he was exaggerating. But I also knew something else. I knew the address he mentioned. The building. The district. Because it was the same building where I worked. The same building I'd been managing projects in for the last 18 months. It clicked slowly, then all at once. He was pitching a lease. To my company. To the firm where I was now director of operations. He didn't know. Of course he didn't know. Because he'd never asked what I did. Because busy was enough for him. Because in his mind, I was still the girl who made potato salad and didn't complain and existed somewhere in the soft, blurry background of his life. And now he was walking straight into my domain, thinking he was the lion, not knowing I'd built the fucking cage. The weeks leading up to the meeting were excruciating. He'd call my parents with updates. Meeting's set, he'd say. Big fish. Could set us up for years. Us. Like he had a team. Like he wasn't just him and his wife, who'd quit her job to support his dreams, and now spent her days photographing their renovated kitchen for Instagram. My mother started planning a celebration dinner. She bought champagne. She asked me if I could make that potato salad again. I said sure. I said it with a smile. And inside, I felt something cold and sharp settling into my bones. Not rage, exactly, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you realize you've been playing chess while everyone else thought you were playing checkers. I didn't tell them. I didn't say a word. I let my brother walk into that building believing he was about to impress strangers. I let him rehearse his pitch over family dinners, let him talk about his strategy, his approach, his brilliant negotiation tactics. I nodded. I smiled. I passed the bread. And at night, alone in my apartment, I reviewed the portfolio for the meeting. I read his proposal, thin, overconfident, riding entirely on charm and a handshake deal that didn't actually exist. I noted every gap, every inflated number, every promise he couldn't keep. And I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt everything compressed into a single point of pressure behind my sternum, a pressure that had been building for 30 years and was finally about to release. My father toasted my brother the night before the meeting. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass, his eyes misty with pride. My brother stood, grinning, accepting the applause like he'd already won. And I sat there, sipping water, watching them, knowing that in less than 12 hours, the entire structure of their understanding would collapse. Not because I planned to humiliate him. Not because I wanted revenge. But because reality doesn't pause for family mythology. And reality was about to walk through the door wearing my face. If you think silence means weakness, don't blink here. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows. That was the first thing most people noticed. The light poured in unfiltered and harsh, the kind of light that makes everything look exposed, clinical, real. I'd chosen this room on purpose. Not for the view. We were high enough that you couldn't see street level, just other buildings, glass and steel reflecting each other infinitely. I'd chosen it because it had one door, and that door faced the elevators, and I wanted to see his face the moment he walked in. I wanted to be seated. I wanted to already be in position. I wanted him to have to come to me. I arrived 20 minutes early. I spread my documents across the table, contracts, zoning reports, financial projections, everything his thin proposal wasn't. I poured myself water from the pitcher on the credenza. I sat at the head of the table, not the side. The head. And I waited. My assistant knocked once, quietly, and I nodded. She opened the door. And there he was. My brother walked in first, chest out, shoulders back, wearing a suit I recognized from Christmas. The one my parents had bought him, the one he'd modeled for us like he was doing us a favor by looking good. His wife followed, clutching a leather portfolio I knew cost more than my monthly car payment, her heels clicking against the polished floor. They were smiling. God, they were smiling. That kind of nervous, excited smile people wear when they think they're about to win something. And behind them, trailing slightly, was the junior partner from my brother's brokerage firm, a man I'd met twice at industry events and who clearly didn't remember me. They stopped. All three of them. Just stopped in the doorway like someone had hit pause. I watched my brother's smile freeze, watched his eyes move from my face to the nameplate in front of me. Director of Operations, my full name in raised letters, and then back to my face, searching for the trick, the mistake, the explanation that would make this make sense. I didn't give him one. I just gestured to the chairs across from me. Please, I said. Sit. His wife moved first, her smile faltering but holding, her training in politeness overriding her confusion. The junior partner followed, professional, already opening his laptop. My brother was the last to sit. He lowered himself slowly into the chair, his eyes never leaving mine, and I could see the calculations happening behind them. Was I here by accident? Was this a joke? Would I help him? Would I defer to someone else, someone more important, someone male? I let him wonder. I let the silence stretch until it started to hurt. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice level neutral, the voice I used in every meeting with every client who expected less from me because I was young, because I was a woman, because I didn't perform authority the way they thought authority should look. I've reviewed your proposal. I tapped the folder in front of me, his folder, the one he'd submitted 3 weeks ago, the one he'd bragged about at dinner. Let's start with the numbers. I watched him try to recover. Watched him lean back in his chair, attempting casualness, attempting control. Of course, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly, just enough. Though I think you'll find the numbers speak for themselves. I smiled. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just smiled. They do, I said. That's the problem. The junior partner coughed, a nervous sound. My brother's wife was staring at me like she'd just realized I was a person, not a prop, not the quiet sister-in-law who never said much at holidays. I pulled out the first page of his proposal and slid it across the table. This projected occupancy rate, I said, pointing to a number he'd clearly pulled from nowhere. Where's it sourced from? He blinked. Market research, he said. Industry standard. I nodded slowly. Which industry? I asked. Because the current occupancy rate for commercial properties in this district is 11% lower than what you've listed here. Has been for 14 months. I pulled out another sheet. And another. Each one a polite evisceration. Each number he'd inflated. Each promise he'd made based on confidence instead of data. Each assumption he'd built on charm and the belief that no one would check. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just laid it out, piece by piece, watching his posture crumble, watching his wife's hand find his under the table, watching the junior partner realize his firm had sent him into a meeting completely unprepared. This is where everything shifted, but not yet. The thing about proof is that it doesn't argue. It doesn't need to. It just exists heavy and undeniable like gravity. I didn't tell my brother he was unqualified. I didn't tell him he'd embarrassed himself. I didn't tell him anything personal at all. I just kept pulling documents from my folder. Tax records. Zoning compliance forms. Market analyses from firms he'd probably never heard of. Each page was a brick, and I was building a wall between his fantasy and reality, and he could do nothing but watch. The budget you've outlined here, I said, sliding another sheet across the glossy conference table, assumes a build-out cost that hasn't been accurate since before the pandemic. Inflation alone accounts for a 23% increase. You haven't factored in permit delays, currently running 6 to 8 weeks in this district. You haven't accounted for the infrastructure requirements specific to this building's age and classification. I paused, letting the words settle. And you've listed a timeline that would require us to violate 3 separate city ordinances. My brother opened his mouth. Closed it. His wife was staring at her hands now, her face flushed, that portfolio sitting useless in her lap. The junior partner was typing frantically, probably sending messages to his boss, probably already drafting the email that would blame this disaster on everyone but himself. My brother started and I held up one hand. Just one hand. And he stopped. He actually stopped. Because for maybe the first time in his life, he understood that his voice wasn't the loudest thing in the room. I'm not saying this to embarrass you, I said, and it was true. I wasn't. I was saying it because it needed to be said. Because reality needed to be spoken. Because for 30 years I'd watched him fail upward on charm and assumptions, and this was the moment where charm didn't matter and assumptions weren't enough. I'm saying this because if I don't, someone else will. And they won't be as kind. Kind. I used that word deliberately. Let him sit with it. Let him realize that this this clinical dissection of his incompetence, was me being kind. That I could have done this differently. I could have let him pitch. I could have let him stumble through his presentation, let him make promises he couldn't keep, let him humiliate himself in front of the full committee. But I didn't. I did this privately. Just us. Just family. Just the people who needed to know. The firm passed on this proposal 2 weeks ago, I said. I delayed the formal rejection because I wanted to have this conversation first. I met his eyes, and for a second, just a second, I saw something that looked like understanding. Not gratitude, not respect, but understanding. The understanding that comes when you realize someone could have destroyed you and chose not to. You're talented, I continued, and I meant it. You're good with people. You make connections easily. But this market requires more than relationships. It requires expertise. And that takes time. I started gathering my documents, stacking them neatly, not looking at him because I knew if I looked, I might feel something I didn't want to feel. Pity, maybe. Or worse, satisfaction. I can recommend some resources, I said. Courses. Networking groups specifically for commercial real estate development. People who can mentor you through the learning curve. I slid a business card across the table. Not mine, someone else's, someone I trusted to be honest without being cruel. If you're serious about this, call her. Tell her I sent you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My brother picked up the card, his hand shaking slightly, and I hated that I noticed. I hated that some part of me still cared, still wanted to protect him, even now, even after everything. His wife touched his arm, gentle, and he flinched. Not from her. From the situation. From the reality that he'd walked into this building thinking he was the success story and was leaving as the cautionary tale. Thank you, he said finally, and his voice was small, quiet, nothing like the booming confidence he'd carried in here 20 minutes ago. I nodded. I stood. The meeting was over. They would leave first. That was protocol. That was politeness. That was the way these things worked. But before they reached the door, my brother turned back. How long have you? He gestured vaguely at the office, the building, the life he'd never bothered to ask about. How long have you been doing this? 3 years, I said. Director for 18 months. He absorbed that, calculated backward, realized he'd been bragging about his one deal while I'd been orchestrating dozens. Realized that every Sunday dinner where he'd dominated the conversation, I could have spoken, could have shared, could have claimed space, but didn't. Why didn't you tell us? He asked, and I heard it, the genuine confusion, the hurt even, like I'd betrayed him by not performing my achievements for his approval. You never asked, I said. And that was all. Most people never see this part. Subscribers do. The first Sunday dinner after the meeting, my brother didn't come. My mother called me 3 times that week, not to ask how I was, but to ask what happened, what I'd done, why he was upset. He won't talk about it, she said, her voice thin with worry, with confusion, with that edge of accusation that mothers get when their golden child is hurting and someone must be to blame. He just says the deal fell through. But he seems different. Angry. Did something happen at work? I could have lied. I could have protected him, protected the mythology, protected the family peace that had always come at my expense. Ask him, I said instead. He can tell you himself. And I hung up. Not dramatically. Not with anger. Just hung up. Because I was done translating my own life into terms they could digest without discomfort. I was done managing their feelings about my existence. My father called next. This was worse. My father never called unless something was seriously wrong, unless the natural order had been disrupted and needed correcting. Your mother's upset, he said, like that was explanation enough, like my mother's feelings were whether I was expected to predict and prevent. Can you just talk to your brother? Whatever happened, you two need to work it out. I let the silence sit between us on the line, let him hear his own assumptions. We did work it out, I said finally. At work. Where it belonged. He didn't understand. I could hear it in his breathing. Family is more important than work, he said, and I laughed. I actually laughed. Sharp and bitter, and surprising even to me. Then why didn't you treat me like family? I asked. And before he could answer, I said, I have to go. Tell Mom I'm fine. And I hung up on him too. I waited for the guilt. I waited to feel like the difficult one, the problem, the daughter who'd ruined everything by refusing to shrink. But the guilt didn't come. What came instead was space. Actual space. Room to breathe. My brother showed up 3 weeks later. Alone. No wife, no parents, no witnesses to whatever this conversation was going to be. I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table. The one I'd bought with my first bonus, the one that fit perfectly in my apartment that no one in the family had ever visited. And we didn't speak for a full minute. I'm sorry, he said eventually, and I realized I'd been waiting my entire life to hear those words, and now that they'd arrived, they felt empty. Insufficient. Too late and too small. For what specifically? I asked, because sorry without understanding is just noise. He flinched. Thought about it. Really thought. For not seeing you, he said finally. For not asking. For assuming you were fine because you never said you weren't. I sipped my coffee. Let him sit with that. I was never fine, I said. I was just quiet. Those aren't the same thing. We didn't hug. We didn't have a breakthrough moment where everything was fixed and forgiven. But something shifted. Not in him, in me. I stopped waiting for them to see me. I stopped performing ease to make them comfortable. I stopped showing up to gatherings where my absence would go unnoticed, but my presence was expected. And slowly, carefully, like a plant that's been moved into better light, I started taking up space. Not loudly, not aggressively, but deliberately. I started mentioning my work, my projects, my achievements. And if they didn't ask follow-up questions, I didn't fill the silence. I just let it sit there, awkward and revealing. We've all watched this play out differently. This time it didn't. People think power is loud. They think it's demands and confrontations and raised voices echoing off walls. But that's not power. That's performance. Real power is quiet. It's knowing what you're worth when no one's watching. It's building a life that doesn't require external validation to be real. It's walking into rooms where people underestimate you and letting the work speak before you do. I don't talk to my family the way I used to. We're not estranged. That would be too dramatic, too final. But we're different now. Honest in a way that's uncomfortable but necessary. They see me now. Not because I demanded it, but because I stopped pretending invisibility was the same as peace. And here's what I learned. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's patience. It's the space between knowing your worth and needing others to confirm it. You don't need permission to exist fully. You don't need approval to take up space. You just need to stop asking for it. Reality doesn't negotiate. It just is. And so am I. If this felt familiar, subscribe. Missing the next one won't.